Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Alex. I'm one of the two Adobe evangelists at the U of A. Brian is here as well. He's our lead and will be manning the chat. Friendly reminder, we love questions. If something didn't quite add up when I demonstrate it, or you missed it, or you need something clarified, please go ahead and chat. We will pause and try and answer the best that we can. And today's theme is text effects or styling, playing with type in Illustrator and in Photoshop. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about the basics. We're going to do a couple of tricks in Illustrator. Then we'll go into Photoshop and look at how type works in there. Check out layer styles. And if we have time, we'll do clipping mask and knockout effects as well. And so again, download those asset files if you've got time. And all right, so let's go ahead and start in Illustrator. We're not going to use this file yet. So we're going to play in Illustrator first. And Adobe Illustrator, a lot of us are probably familiar with that program by now. It is kind of the industry standard for design for working with what we call vector graphics. And vector graphics they're basically math that they can be infinitely scaled without losing quality, right? You can make it 500 points or 2 points, and when you zoom in, the lines will be nice and smooth. So Illustrator is really great for graphics, for a lot of two-dimensional work. Sorry, Zoom is being weird. It's telling me that you can now see my screen. So we're going to start there. Photoshop is a raster-based application, which means it works mostly with pixels. But let's go ahead and make a new document in Illustrator. Just click Create New, and you should be able to choose the common size. If you don't see it there, I don't actually know where to find it anymore. Just choose any size. I'm going to use common, which is in my recent, but it's not a big deal what size. We're just plopping type in there in general. Okay, so this is Illustrator. I'm not going to give you a huge tour, but on the left-hand side, before we do that, actually, I encourage you to check that your workspace is the same as mine. Thank you, Brian. It is under web presets. So let's make sure we're on the same workspace so you don't lose panels. Go to Window, Workspace, and I'm going to work with Essentials Classic just because it already has a bunch of panels open for us. Usually it's set to Essentials, which is really clean. So Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic. And in Illustrator, on the left-hand side, we have our toolbar. We're going to use a few tools: the selection tool, direct selection tool, type tool, the eyedropper, and maybe some of our shape tools here. On the right-hand side, we have these windows that will let us make adjustments in specific parts. It has tools like swatches, brushes, and they'll be specific to objects and tools that we use. And then we have our properties panel, which displays what it displays depends on what you have selected or what tool you are using. So we also have this options bar up here that is similar to the properties. You'll actually see there's 100 ways to do the same thing in a lot of Adobe applications, which is wonderful because you choose the way that works best for you. But up here, I have my stroke and my fill. Up here, I have my stroke and my fill. And over here, I have stroke and fill again too. So if you have a place that you like to change it that's different from what I'm doing, that's fine. All right, let's go ahead and start talking about type. To use the type tool, you just press T on the keyboard, or you click the T in the toolbar. And the first thing I want to show you is the two different ways that you can place type on your artboard. You can just click once, And you'll see this lorem ipsum, that's the filler text. It's just so you get a preview of what it's going to be. You can also just type over it. So this is my text. And when you just click and type, you're doing what's called a point type. And point type just keeps typing along a line. It follows that line and nothing constrains it unless you enter down. And that's how you do a new line. If you are happy with the type that you've created, you can hit escape, which is a little confusing, but hitting escape will commit your type, or you can click back on the move tool, or you can hold shift and click on it, I think. No, I don't remember that one. Option click. I don't know. Just hit escape. So if you hit escape, it commits your type and it switches you to the selection tool, which sometimes I'll call the move tool because I'm more of a Photoshop dude. And with that, you can grab your type and move it around. And it's really small right now. We can zoom in, Command plus, or zoom out, Command minus. It's showing us equals, but I'm hitting plus, Command minus. And you can hit Command 0 to fit it back. But instead of zooming in, let's make it bigger. And the nice thing about point type is you can resize it with the selection tool, but you have to be really careful because right now I'm doing something that is generally frowned upon, which is I'm destroying the proportions. I want to constrain proportions. So if I use the selection tool to resize, I want to hold shift. Oh yes, and thank you. If I say Command plus, it's Control in Windows. So I'll remember to do that. So I can resize that way. You can also use the properties panel and resize here. A lot of people come from word processors and are used to using a drop-down menu. It ends at 72, but that's not the biggest font size you can use. Something that I like to do is click in there, and then you can use the arrow keys to make it bigger, 1 point at a time. But if you hold shift, it'll make them bigger 10 points at a time. So shift up, and you can kind of watch it get bigger and smaller. And my keycaster is showing you that I'm pressing it a bunch of times there. So, so that's point type. And again, you can double click to edit it, escape to commit. You can go back in your type tool and click once to edit your type. There are many ways to get back into your type. Now let's choose a different font because I want to show you something that I think is really neat. In my properties over here, I have my fonts, which I can go through and preview. But if somebody is telling you to use a font that you don't have, Adobe has a really great way of, if you have the Adobe CC subscription, that if you're a U of A person, this is provided. But you can go and activate a font almost immediately just by going to, I think it's called the font book, I forgot. But if you go to the type window and you choose more fonts from Adobe, it will take you to fonts.adobe.com, and you can go here and choose, you can type something. Last thing I typed was cool font, because I guess I was looking for some cool fonts. And you can search by tags, like I want typewriter style fonts, and it'll preview what you typed here and show you. And then if you find one that you think is actually a cool font that you'd like I don't know, Click Clack, I like the name, you click on it, or you clack on it, and then you just activate your font. And almost immediately, when you go to your font dropdown, you will have that font. There's my Click Clack. So don't feel like you can only use the fonts that are preloaded in your system. This is the story here. And then what I'd also like to show you is, let's go to Proxima. This is the university's official font. When you have your font, it also has styles underneath it. A lot of us that are used to Word, Microsoft, we're used to clicking bold, italicize, And those aren't really buttons here. They are in Photoshop and in character panels, but it's better to use styles. And you see Proxima has some of the most available styles I've seen. It has thin, which is thinner than regular, sometimes called oblique on other fonts. And then you can have thin italic. You can have light, which is thicker than thin, but thinner than regular. And all the way down to black, black italic. Black is generally going to be the chunkiest version of your type. So that's how you do what's called point type. You just click once. It's a good way to make type that you're going to do a logo, a header, like a banner style. But if you're working with quite a bit of text, there's a different type of type that you might want to use. So before I move on to area type, are there any questions about what I've shown you so far? I'm going to grab my selection tool, click here and delete it. If you have questions as they come, go ahead. So again, type tool, click once, that's point type. You enter down, oops, to do that. Or you can click and drag and create what's called area type. And area type will be confined to the box that you draw. And one thing about area type is you can't resize it with the selection tool. What you're actually resizing is your area that you drew. So you'll have to use your properties panel to change the size of the font, which is, again, not too hard to do. Let's make it, yeah, that's fine. And actually, I wanted to, well, let's do it one more time with, I'm gonna get a whole bunch of lorem ipsum. So let's go like this. And this font is confined to the box that I drew. It filled it with that lorem ipsum, that kind of preview font. And if I grab my selection tool and shrink it down, you'll get this little red box with a plus, and that's your warning that your font, your type, excuse me, has been cut off by the area that you made. This is not really here now, but it's kind of cool. You can actually click that and draw another box and create what's called threaded type, which is, I believe, a tool from InDesign that Illustrator now has. Pretty neat. Okay, so with area type, you type in the box and it lives within the box. Pretty cool. Otherwise, everything is the same. You know, you can change your font in the same ways. You can select it. You can use your justifications here, center, right, left. You can center it within the box with the area type options, not so much for point type. And then you can do some other things, which I'm going to exit this area type to demonstrate. So the other things you can change about your type are the leading, the kerning, and the tracking. So let's look at those momentarily. For leading, you have to have more than one line of text. I believe leading described the space around the typeset back when we made type with metal, with lead letters, but that's not, I'm not an expert on typography. So someone, if you have a better answer, that's great. But what leading does is it changes the spacing in between your type. We call that the baseline. The baseline is the invisible line where our type exists, right? If you're like me and you remember learning how to write cursive, there was like the dotted baselines that you would follow and go beneath and swoop back up. It's basically that. So your leading is next to the font size. If you kind of hover on it, it usually says leading, but it's not saying it right now. So you can arrow down, like I said, you can click in it, hold shift and type down, and they go, you can have them overlap, which is not good styling, but that's what leading does. So if you want to go and control the space between in something that has area type, that has multiple lines, that's how you do that. The next thing is called kerning, and kerning is meant to only adjust the space between pairs of characters. Characters are, letters, numbers, and symbols. And kerning is sometimes jokingly called kemming, because if you kern them too close, letters will combine. So R and N can be an M. And you can go right here. This is called kerning. And right now it's set to -40 because I think I was playing with it. But if I move that, I just click where I want to adjust. And that's how you can kind of start to create stylized choices. Maybe you like the idea of the Y being underneath the T. Totally up to you. You have that precision with the typography tools. And then the last one is called tracking. And for tracking, you select your text, or you have the whole object, and you just change the space between all characters. So letting the space between baselines, kerning the space between two characters, tracking the space between all characters. Any questions about those? Cool, cool. The best thing is you can see what they do, right? What you see is what you get. So let's look at one more let's look at how type works with paths and objects. So if we were to draw a polygon, so I'm going to click and hold on the rectangle and go down to polygon, and I'm just going to draw one. If you hold shift, it keeps it with a flat base. So there's my polygon. I'm going to do no fill here, switch to stroke, and give it a little black outline so that we know. If you have a shape that you want your text to go inside of, you can still use your type tool, and you just click on the path of the shape. Don't click inside the shape. That's a Photoshop thing. Click on the path of the shape with the type tool selected, and now you have type within that shape. And again, all your typography adjustments will exist within that space. You can justify it in the center. You can shrink it down. And I'll show you one more thing. Let's reset these all to auto and 0. Okay. So, oh, I lost my shape. Let's make another one. I want to also show you that you can wrap text. This might be extraneous information, but I think it's such a quick thing to see that it's worth showing you. Okay, and I'm just going to duplicate this text. Boink. So if you have a shape that you want to, like, say you're creating a banner or a flyer and you want the text to get pushed aside by an image or a shape, you can pretty easily wrap it by just putting your shape on top of it or your image. So let's just put a circle here. And all you do is go Object, Text Wrap, and Make. And then that tells Illustrator to push the text aside from it. Of course, I'd probably have smaller text than this and have it actually say something. But that's the general outlook of how to put text down and put it into shapes. Are there questions so far? We're doing pretty good. All right. The last thing I think is something that a lot of people want to know how to do, and that's how to put your type on a path, not inside an object, but say you want to have a circular logo or a logo that follows some sort of specific shape. So let's draw another circle. I'm going to hold shift so that it's a perfect circle. Another thing, that if you hold spacebar while drawing it, you can relocate it, or you can move it after the fact. But if you put a shape down with the type tool, when you click on it, it's text in a path, right? In an object. But if you click and hold on the type tool, you can switch to type on a path. And what this does is it instructs the type to follow your path. So if I click on the line of this circle that I drew, I now have text that follows the shape of the circle. Look at me type. That's pretty easy. But then a point when maybe it's just me, but I've seen people, and it happened to me too, is I wasn't sure how to change where the text started, or maybe I wanted it on the inside. And that seemed to be a little confusing sometimes. So let's hit escape to commit our text. And I want you to notice 3 things along my path now. Well, I have my type, so that's 4 things. I have these blue lines here, these 2 handles. Don't hit the squares. Those are text threading tools that will move it somewhere else. So make sure you only hit the lines. These let you designate the start and end. You kind of just dial it around. And then on the opposite end, we have this single blue line that lets you, it's basically a baseline shift tool where you move the text over to the other side of the baseline. So let's zoom out and see what that looks like. So if I grab one of these handles, I can move where the text is and maybe go like this as well. If I shorten this, I'm saying text can only be on this part of the path. So it only exists between those 2 handles. And you'll see that familiar plus sign, meaning my text has been cut off. So let's just bring that back. And then to move it to the inside of the circle, and I've noticed sometimes my lines get a little small, but you can see it right here. And you know you're going to grab it because you get that line with an arrow. If I click that and move it inside the circle, I can also drag it around. Now my text is inside the circle, which I think is something that a lot of people usually want to know how to do. Do we want to see any of that again? This little line right here is your friend. You can actually even use it to move this text around or move it to the outside. Okay, and you can just use your pen tool to draw a path. Hit escape to commit it. I don't want it to have a fill, or hit enter, sorry. So I'll swap this, and if I grab my type on a path tool, the type will follow. And I will have the same function here. I can move it to the other side of the path if I want. Thanks for joining, Tiffany. And for everyone's info, this will of course be recorded and available. Okay. Let's do one more thing, and then we will do a little 3D stuff. Okay. So we'll make that. So I'm just going to type the word effect out, and I want to show you that under effect, we have the warp option, which lets you do a bunch of distortions to your text. So it lets you warp it. You can arc it, and you just adjust the amount of arc here. And then the distortion effects. So if you do a minus horizontal, the left side gets bigger and the right side gets smaller, and opposite if you do plus. And then vertical is a similar idea where a minus vertical effect makes the bottom shrink in and the top expand out. And then the other way makes it look like the Star Wars intro text. I wonder if that's how they did it. Let's put that back to 0. But you have a lot of these, and I'm just going to encourage you to play with them. Some are a lot more useful than others. I think use cases for the fish effect are probably really, really rare. I would love to see how often people use the fish warp, but it's pretty cool. But flag is kind of nice if you're trying to put the text inside of a little flag shape and things like that. So those are your warp tools I encourage you to explore. And then another one I want to show you is 3D extrude and bevel. This is a really quick way to turn type into, well, really any object, but we're going to do it for type, into a 3D look. It doesn't work too well with type with a black fill, so I'm going to change it to blue. Nice. And Effect, 3D, extrude, and bevel. Extrude is the idea of to kind of push something out through something. If you ever played with Play-Doh and you extruded it through the star shape. So all it does is take it and stretch it out. All right, extrude and bevel. You get this little window, make sure preview is turned on, and you see the 3D effect happening here. Pretty neat. If you click on this cube, that's how you change the angle. You can kind of move it around and change how your 3D effect is being, the perspective of it, if you will. And then you can change the depth of the extrusion. And if you prefer, you can go and use the dials instead. So if I take my extrusion up, I get a much bigger 3D effect. And then you can try different bevels, which will give it a different surface and angle to it. So you can see that beveled the edges back. Some of them get a little strange looking, depending if you go too deep. But this is a pretty nice, quick way to turn something into 3D. There's like an accordion effect. That's kind of fun. Okay. So those are kind of our basic universal tools in Illustrator. There's a lot more. It's a deep program, but what I want to show you is how to use the blend tool to create kind of a fancier 3D effect. So if you can open along with me the faux3d.ai file, we're going to make this 3D effect together. We're going to just do this. And while you guys are getting it open, I'm going to talk about what happened here. So what is happening with this file is we took 6 copies of the type and a background rectangle color. And we used 2 copies and blended them to make the shadow. We used 2 copies and blended them to make the extrusion. And then we used a gradient and a solid color on top. So I think it's important to kind of visualize what we're doing, because as we go, it's going to be a little like, wait, why are we doing this? And I'm going to try my best to explain it too. Okay, so what I'd like you to notice is I put that as our little where we're going. Up top, I put screenshots of the university colors because we can sample colors quickly this way. You could build a swatch. You could do quite a few things to have your colors ready, but I just thought this was the quickest way for us. So let's go ahead and start by opening our layers panel. And I want you to notice that we have a layer called UA colors. We're going to go ahead and lock that by clicking the empty square next to the eyeball. And we're going to make a new layer. I highly recommend being organized by double clicking and naming it background. And what we're going to do now is grab our rectangle tool, click and drag from the top left corner down to the bottom left. If you can't see it, you just push your mouse over and it'll do it. And go ahead and let go. I just put down a white rectangle, but I actually want it to be blue like this, which is the azurite color. And there's a really nice tool for that. It's the eyedropper, which you can press I on the keyboard and click on the color you want it to be, and it will copy that style. So it's a really useful way of getting colors, which is why I just like to have colors on there. So we made our background rectangle. We use the eyedropper to switch its color to azurite, and we're going to lock this layer as well. Now I'm going to make another layer. You can collapse, you can condense that UA colors label layer. And this new layer we're going to name type. Now we're going to grab our type tool. I'll press T on the keyboard, and you can type whatever you like. I'm going to type Adobe Arizona because that's who we are. You can hit escape and use the selection tool while holding shift to make it bigger. And I'm going to use the font Impact because I know everybody has that installed and it's a nice thick font that will kind of exaggerate that 3D. So I'll go over to the character panel and properties, and I will choose Impact. All right. I also want you to notice in properties, we have Align, which is for objects, not for text. So I can actually click this and it will center it vertically on my artboard. I'm not going to center it horizontally because I want it to be above the center a little bit. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn this type into outlines. We're going to turn it into objects instead of type by clicking the Create Outlines button. And the reason we do this is because some of our fill and stroke options are limited when you're on typography, but for outlines, we can do more. So click Create Outlines, and you'll see that it has now become a series of objects that are grouped together. If you were to use the direct selection tool, you could grab one and, oops, move it. Sorry, move it around. You can go in and you can change the anchor points and make your shapes different. But let's undo, get it back to normal. So for now, let's not worry about that. But like I said, this is going to be built up of multiple copies of the same type layer. So I'm going to open up my type layer that I made. And I'm going to rename this group gradient. That's my top layer. And then I'm going to copy and paste it 3 times. But you're not going to just Command C or Control C and Command and Control V. You're going to copy. You can do that, Command or Control C, or you can go Edit, Copy. And then you're going to do Paste in Front, which if you look in Edit, Paste in Front is Command or Control F, or you can just do the Edit menu 3 times. So I'm going to press Command or Control F 2 more times. So I should have 4 of my gradient layers. The gradient is the topmost layer. That's why I named that one. And then we're going to name the other ones. This one is the face. This one is extrude 1. And this one is extrude 2. And I'm just double clicking. Sometimes I think sometimes I double click in the wrong part and it brings up the whole window, but it's the same idea. Okay, everybody good? I think we're good. So we're going to hide the gradient and face layers for now. And what we're going to do is look at these extrusion layers. The extrusion, remember, is just what creates that 3D effect. And if you look, my bottom extrusion was a darker red, like Arizona red, and my top extrusion was a lighter red, like this bloom color. So let's go ahead and give them those colors. But what we're going to do, because these layers are on top of each other, we're going to use the layers menu to select them. So if you look at the layer extrude 1 and you click on the box next to this circle, you've now selected that one. And we're going to grab our eyedropper and click on bloom. And then we'll click on the box underneath that one for extrude 2. And it looks like we still have extrude 1 selected. If that's confusing, you can hide it for a second. And we're going to click on chili with our eyedropper. How did you get the properties panel in the right-hand side of the screen? So if you are in a different workspace, make sure you go to Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic. If you are on that and it still looks strange, tell it to reset Essentials Classic. Yeah, no need to apologize for asking questions. That's what we're here for. Okay, so awesome. I love to hear that. Our extrusion, it goes from a smaller version of the typeface and expands to the full size version. So we're actually done with extrude 1 for now. Let's leave it unhidden. So if you hit it, bring it back, because that's going to give us a reference for what we're doing. And then what we're going to do is select extrude 2 again. And over here in the transform menu, give you a second to find it, we're going to use the Y axis to move it down, and it's kind of confusing because we're actually going to add to the Y axis. So I'm going to hold shift and press my up arrow, I don't know, 4 times. You can do more. This is kind of a preview of the depth of our extrusion. So if you push it down more, it'll just have a deeper extrusion. It's a user's choice. So I went to the Y, I held shift, and I pressed the up arrow 4 or 5 times. And then we also need to make it a little bit smaller, which is also a type of transformation. Before you do the width, make sure this chain link is active. If you see it like this with a line through it, that's not good. We're going to mess our proportions up. So turn that chain link on. We're going to go to width, and we're going to make it smaller. I'm going to hold shift and arrow down, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. It's up to you. You're just previewing what you're going to blend. Okay. We need to make 2 more layers for the shadow, and the shadow is based on this lower extrusion. So we want the shadow to come off of the bottom of it. So while this is selected still, so make sure your box is next to extrude 2. We're going to copy it again 2 times, but we're not going to paste in front. We're going to paste in back. So edit, copy, or Command or Control C, and edit, paste in back, which is Command or Control B. Command or Control B, and you'll see I have extrude 2 3 times now. And we're going to rename those as well. Shadow 1, shadow 2. Okay, now if we visualize our shadow, we can see it starts at the base of the extrusion and it fades out down here. To do that, we need to take shadow 2 and move it down. If you grab your selection tool and you click and drag, you end up moving the wrong layer. So don't do that, please. But do grab your selection tool, click the box next to shadow 2, and just use your arrow keys to bring it down. And if you hold shift, it'll do it faster. Once you see it down there, then you can click and grab it. You could also hide layers and get it there. But so shadow 2 should be down here somewhere. You can see it says I'm on shadow 2, which is good. And now we need to give these the right colors. So I'm going to hide my extrusions. So I only see shadow 1 and shadow 2 right now. Shadow 2 is going to be the same color as the background because it kind of disappears into it. So I'm going to grab my eyedropper and click on Azurite. And then I'm going to select shadow 1, and that's a deep blue like Midnight or Arizona blue, whichever one you want. So I'll click that. And again, shadow 2 is there. It's just the same color as the background, so it disappeared. So we've got our shadow that we're going to blend these 2 outlines together. And then we have our extrusion that is going to be made out of these 2 outlines. Are we ready to do some blending? I see. Right. All right, let's do it. So click on the box for extrude 1, hold shift and click on the checkbox for extrude 2. Then we're going to go object, blend, and we're going to set our blend options because you can blend in many ways. And what we're going to do in blend options is choose specified steps. and we want 400 steps. So we want it to do 400 steps from the first object to the one underneath. So object blend, blend options, set it to specified steps, 400 steps, please. And then we go back to object blend and we say, make that blend, please. If I click off here, you can see it blended those two together. And then we'll do it again for the shadow. So I'm going to click on shadow 1, hold shift, click on shadow 2. My blend options are already set, so I can go blend, make, or command option B if you like, or control option B, alt B, and it will make my shadow. Pretty sweet, a little cooler than just an extrusion. And then if we bring our face back, we can select it, make it whatever color you like. Eyedropper, I'm just going to make it that warm gray. And the idea is to, actually, I think we're just going to finish with a gradient. So let's just forget about the face and then we'll jump into Photoshop. So let's go to gradient, select that. And if you look at your fill and stroke options, if you're not on fill, just click these two arrows. Well, actually, no, just click on the solid one. So click on stroke to bring that forward, click on the solid square to bring that forward. And then you can choose gradient. And you can see it's making a gradient from black to white at 0 degrees, which isn't quite what I want. So what we're going to do is switch the degrees to 90. Now it's going black to white from the bottom. And we are going to change the color. So I'll click on this dot by the black. And look, there's our friend, the eyedropper. I'm going to give that guy a click and choose, let's do blue. Let's do sky. Nice. And then I can go back to my selection tool and I can see what I made. Does anybody need to see any of those things again? Because we're going to leave Illustrator in a second. And if you ever want to do this again, all of these steps are written out step by step, along with a video from an Adobe Max event. But I wrote these all step by step out for you with different colors, but everything is here in case you forget. Once you do it a few times, you kind of understand what the blends do and it makes sense, but it can take a few attempts to internalize this stuff. Can I show the shadowing again? Of course. So let's step back a bunch here. All right. Do I have, I'm out of, okay. So let's just delete the two shadow layers. So I had my two extrusions. I made the bottom extrusion smaller and slightly below. And then I copied that one. So I select it and I'm going to press Command or Control C. And then I'm going to press Command or Control B twice. And then I named them Shadow 1, Shadow 2. Shadow 1 can hang out where it is, but Shadow 2 needs to come down and to the left, which with the selection tool selected, I use the arrow keys to move it down. So I hold Shift and just move them down. And there's my shadow point, the second part of the shadow. I made the shadow 2 the same color as the background, which is azurite. So I grabbed my eyedropper, clicked on azurite, and I made shadow 1 a darker blue. You can see it blends from dark blue to the background color. So I'll grab the eyedropper and click on midnight. And the reason you didn't see it change is because my extrusion is on top of it. So then you select both of those, you hold Shift, click on both of them. And object blend, you make sure your blend options are set to specified steps, 400. And then you go object blend make. And there's the shadow. And it was the same if we turn the extrude on, click on the first one, hold shift, click on the second one, object, blend, make. So we just did the shadow and extrusion separately. And if we want to go back to any of this, we'll have time at the end of the class too. So I love questions. You guys want to go play in Photoshop a little bit? Hope it's not an information overload. All right, that's a little bit of Illustrator. Illustrator is huge too. So let's go into Photoshop and let's create new as well. And under photo, you can just choose default Photoshop size. And again, before we go into what we're doing, check that your workspace is the same as mine so that we're seeing the same. I'm going to work in Essentials. Usually I switch it to photography because that's what I'm used to, but Essentials is going to have everything we need. So Window, Workspace, Essentials. And I'm going to reset it because I have something extra in mind. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Photoshop is a raster-based program, which means it's meant to deal with pixels, right? Photographs are made out of pixels and they are finitely, they have a defined size. You can only zoom in and out of them. You can make them smaller generally without losing quality, but if you start to make them bigger, it has to start creating pixels, which is why you end up with jagged edges and bizarre artifacts. But you can do a lot with type as well, and you can always start in Illustrator and send type right into it. Everything plays pretty nicely together. For me, I usually use Photoshop just because it's what I'm used to and fastest with. So you'll find the type tool on the toolbar, same keyboard shortcut, T. It works the same. Click once, point type. You might notice that I can't see it because of two reasons. This is a big difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. If anything leaves the canvas, Photoshop has a canvas, Illustrator has an artboard. You don't see it. But also I typed with white. So if I select it with Command A and switch it to, I don't know, red, there's my point type. One thing I really like about Photoshop's type tool that I haven't found Illustrator's does is while you're still typing, if you move your mouse outside of it, it'll switch to the move tool and you can click and move your font, your type. And it also has my favorite way to adjust the size, which is called a scrubby adjustment. If you look at the font size here and you click on the T, you get this hand, and it's basically you're clicking and dragging to the left to make it smaller, clicking and dragging to the right to make it bigger. So let's click and drag to the left. There's my point type. To commit, you can hit escape or the check mark, or if you have a number pad, you can hit the enter on the number pad. But escape is a nice way to remember because it's the same on both programs. Okay, point type. Notice it doesn't have a selection tool, it has a move tool. You can move it around, but you can't resize it unless you tell it you want to free transform it, which is under edit, transform, or edit free transform, or Command or Control T. And that will actually resize it and change the font size as well. You can also do paragraph type, area type, the same way. Here's my scrubbies. So that's kind of nice. And you have the same font library. If you want to install more, it's actually this little Adobe CC option. It's probably up here too. Yeah, more fonts from Adobe. So that's a nice consistency between the two. And when we're adjusting the type, you're going to see that we have leading, we have kerning, and we have tracking. That's cool. But if we want to see more options, they're here in the options bar. We have the justification, but you can also go to Window, Character. Excuse me, Window, Character. And there you can find a few things like setting it to all caps, which I apparently have turned on. I thought, yeah, there we go. and a few other things. And I encourage you to play around with these because it's pretty similar to what we saw already. It even has the same warp options as Illustrator. This menu is exactly the same. There's our good friend fish warp. I'm going to make an ocean of font. Pay attention to your layers panel as you're working in Photoshop. Make sure you don't get lost and end up on the wrong layer. But let's go ahead. I'm going to click on each of these and delete them. We're going to do what's called a clipping mask. I think that's what's on here. Oh no, we're going to do layer styles first. So I'm going to grab the type tool, click once and type the word styles. And I'll highlight it and scrub it big. Boink. Move my mouse over here and hit escape or the check mark. Photoshop has layer styles and Illustrator has some of these too, but I think the menu, the workspace for it in Photoshop is just nicer to use and has a few more options. So if you go to your type layer and you double click this empty space next to the name, or you can go down to FX and choose a specific one, but I'd rather just bring the whole window up from the starting point. So I'll double click, not on the text, but in the empty space next to it. And I will get this layer style window. And layer styles let you apply effects to your type. So I'm going to zoom in like that. And let's start from drop shadow. And what you want to do is click on the word drop shadow, because if you click the checkbox, it puts it on there, but you don't get the options to adjust it. So you click on the word, you can change the angle, distance, spread, and size. For angle and distance, I like to actually click and drag to move it around. I'm a more manual kind of person, but you can also just change the angle here and change the distance here. But again, you can click and drag. Then you can change the opacity, which is how transparent or not it is. You can change the spread, which affects the edge, and the size, which affects the blur of it, right? It's kind of like, are you seeing a shadow with some strong sunshine, with some diffusion? Is it like a window light where the shadow is just like a little blob? So you have all these options here, and you can move it kind of around. Less is more, I think, with a lot of drop shadows. Sometimes it's just a nice way to create distance between the type and the background. So let's just do, and sometimes I like to just put the size to 0 and just make it be kind of a hard shadow like that, but it's entirely up to what you like. All right, let's do this little one. And then outer glow puts a glow on the outside. We'll look at patterns in a second. Gradient overlay, right now it's doing a gradient from white to white, which is not great. By the way, to change the gradient, you can click here and check out other ones, or you can make custom ones. So just like with the shadow, you can actually click and drag to move the gradient around, and you can change the scale of it so that the transition happens sooner or later. And you can change the angle as well. Color overlay puts a solid color on top. If I do that, I'll lose my gradient, so not so great. Satin, yeesh. Yeah, they just added a ton of gradients, and you can also, no, I think that's a great point, Brian, saying that all those gradients are pretty awesome, because you used to have to go and just make your own all the time. Satin, it gives it this kind of finished look. It's a little big right now, or is it a little small? I don't play with satin a lot, if I'm being totally honest, but there's your kind of satin look. So it kind of makes it look like satin fabric. They really are self-descriptive. Inner glow is a glow on the inside. Inner shadow is a shadow on the inside. So you can make it look more like a cutout than a floating text, which is kind of fun. Stroke is the word for outline, which you can change the size of. You can move it to the outside or the center. You can choose a different color. You can also do a gradient stroke, which usually doesn't look very good, but It's up to you guys what you do with them. And bevel and emboss is like a kind of 3D look where it rounds the edges off and makes it look embossed, like something that's been punched through paper. So, and you can add contouring, which affects the edges. And you can add a texture too, which you choose. Kind of cool looking. This is applying a texture from this leaf pattern. So you can get pretty weird with text pretty quick. Let's cancel, because I also want to show you that there are preset styles. If you go to Window, Styles, and I'm going to show you everybody's, this is Brian's favorite layer style preset. It's the cheetah pattern. So just like that fish warp, you know, always use these actually, this looks exactly like when Mac OS Leopard came out, right? You remember the sorry, total side note. But there's these presets. So there's like a tiger rug and fabric. So you can very quickly apply these effects to your type. And if you look at the layer now, you can see it beveled and embossed. It gave it a stroke, an inner shadow, a color, a pattern, and a drop shadow. And if you don't like the pattern, but you like everything else, you can hide specific parts of it. Okay, layer styles are pretty cool. Let's do a clipping mask. Any questions about those? I think we'll get there. All right, so again, with the type tool, I'm just going to type mask, and I'll move it over, and I'll hit OK. And we're going to drop the space JPEG in here. So if you go to your assets, you grab space, just click and drag it onto your canvas, and make sure it completely covers up your type that you put, and then hit OK. And clipping masks are super fun. What they do, masking in Photoshop is the process of instructing Photoshop to hide pixels and display pixels, or make certain pixels transparent or semi-transparent. So a clipping mask means it's going to create a mask based on a layer that you clip it to. So to do a clipping mask, you put your layer that you want to put inside the text above it, and then you tell Photoshop to clip it to the text, which means it will only display based on the pixels that are on the layer underneath it, which might sound, I might have butchered my explanation, but when you see it happen, you're like, oh, that makes sense. So to apply this clipping mask, space should be above the type layer. And there's a few ways. You can right click, if you're on a Mac, control click, create clipping mask, or you can hold Option or Alt and click on the line in between the two of them. And now I have space inside this mask. And if I wish it said space instead, I can double click this T and type space, and it's still clipping inside of there. And what's kind of fun is when you move your type around, you're displaying different areas, and you can see when the picture runs out, it shows the regular red text. Or I can grab the space layer and move space around too. So I just put space above, and I held Option or Alt and clicked on the line in between. And I can go and add layer styles here. I can put a drop shadow on it. I can bevel and emboss. I mean, I can do anything. I'm unstoppable. Anyway, that's a clipping mask. Pretty fun. Now let's look at the opposite of this, which is a knockout effect, which is where you create a hole in the shape of the type that you've created. And there's a few ways to do it, but I'm going to show you a way that I like that lets you still edit the text after creating the effect. So unless we want to see any of this again, I'm going to do a different effect now. So you always put orange slices inside the type, Brian? Is that what?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think just the texture works. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I like that. I always do it with space. I don't know. I think it's just it's out of this world. Um, so let's just go ahead and drop our bricks layer on top of this instead of making a new document. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Oh, so my bricks layer ended up in between. We'll fix that in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and make it the size of the whole canvas. So if you accidentally put them in between, just grab the bricks layer and move it to the top. You'll notice I lost my clipping mask. I broke it when I put something in between and moved it. So I'm going to hold Option Alt and click here. I still have space, which doesn't matter because my brick layer is on top of it. All right, so what I'm going to type now is, oops. All right, I'm on my brick layer. I grab my type tool. I'm going to click once and I'm going to type knockouts. And again, I can get the move tool, move it over, Command Control A to select it all, scrubby it down, and then hit escape to commit. And this is almost as easy as making a clipping mask, almost as few steps, but you have to do a couple more things. There's something else I need here. So I need to make a shape that I'm going to create the knockout on. Well, let's just do it to the brick layer. That'll be interesting. Excuse me for changing my mind on how to do this. I'll show you the other way after that. So you need to have your type and the layer that you're going to cut that type out of together with the type on top. And then you need to put them in a group. So I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to click on Knockout, hold Shift, and click on Bricks. And then I'm going to click on this little folder icon or press Command or Control G. If I open that folder up, I go to the knockout layer and I'm going to bring that layer styles window up. I'm going to double click and I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to turn the fill opacity down. Fill describes the layer content specifically, and opacity describes everything, the layer and the styles. So we basically turned the type off, but we can still apply styles to it. So just for your information, if I hit stroke, I'll see knockout with an outline instead, but that's not what we're doing. We're going to, underneath the fill opacity slider that we took to 0, we're going to take knockout and set it to shallow. And that's really hard to read. Let's turn the layer mask off of space. And you can see I've created a knockout effect on the brick wall. I'm going to do it one more time the way I intended to demonstrate. So let's go ahead and let me think about how I want to do this. I'm going to move the brick layer out of the group. And I'm going to go and move the group above it. I hope this isn't too confusing. Inside the group, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, draw a rectangle. Mine's set to red. I like that. I think that's good. I'm going to put the stroke to no stroke. And these corners let you resize it, but the circles let you create a rounded edge if you like. And I've already done the settings. So if I move the knockout text above it, it's already creating a knockout effect. And what's cool is, because some of us might have done a selection and masked it, but I can change this type, I don't know, to the word bricks, and the knockout effect stays without me having to do anything over again. And same game, I can put another layer style on here if I wanted. I don't know, an inner shadow. It's probably what makes sense. And then on the rectangle, I could put in outer shadow. Drop shadow, excuse me. And that's kind of everything I wanted to show you all today. At this point, we've got about 18 minutes for questions if you have any. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's play with some types some more. Let's answer questions, or if you feel good, don't feel like you have to stay, you can have an early finish for the day. And you can ask anything if there's something you want to know how to do that we didn't. Thank you too, Michael. Thanks for joining.
How did you round the rectangle?
Okay, good question, because I did that kind of quick. So with the rectangle tool, you draw it. And if you look here, the outside rectangle is the resize. The circle is the rounded corner option. I just clicked and dragged it in.
Thank you.
Anytime. Yes, that's a great point. Brian says Illustrator works similarly as well. So if I draw a rectangle, look at that. And I'm not sure in Photoshop, but in Illustrator, if you use the direct selection tool, you can do them one at a time as well, which is really nice.
So if I made a rectangle and I didn't round it, and then I clicked out of it and I was doing stuff, when I try to go back to the rectangle, like if I do Command T or something to resize, I don't see those little circles in it anymore. Like, how do we get it after the fact, you know?
So what you do is you click on that rectangle layer and go back to your rectangle tool. Yeah, good question. Because you would think free transform would let you do that, but it doesn't. They're two different things.
Thank you.
Yeah, these are great questions. You can apply layer styles to anything. So I can have a beautiful cheetah rectangle if I wanted. Looks like a comfy pillow. And depending on your layer order, that knockout effect will continue to happen because this is underneath that bricks layer. If I were to move it above, then it would block it. What have I made? This is my finest work. While we're here, I'll show you guys, you can do 3D with Photoshop as well. I intended to show you this, but it wasn't working for a while. But if you type, hold up, let me do this in a way that makes sense. All right, go to bricks. I'm gonna type 3D. You can go to the 3D menu and do a new extrusion from selected layer. It'll change your workspace, which can be a little alarming. And then you'll get, in my opinion, a far more powerful 3D tool that can do a lot more. You can choose a ton of different surfaces, and ooh, that's ugly. You can also, it'll build reflections based on the environment, but I don't think I want to go into that yet. But if you render it, then you end up with a three-dimensional text in there that has been rendered. And you can see, I think it decided to reflect some of the brick in there in a bizarre way. Oof, I'm gonna escape. It said it was gonna take 10 minutes to render. We don't want to sit here and watch it render. Yeah, anything else? Anything you're curious about? Anything we've talked about and other things that might have been need clearing up?